Hello there. Welcome to our latest Glasgow Loves EU live stream. We're really pleased to welcome this evening the artist and sculptor Kate Robinson, whom I've known for quite a while. Like myself, Kate is a Glaswegian by adoption, I suppose. She obtained a first-class Bachelor Honours in Fine Art at Glasgow School of Art in 1989, and then later a PhD at the University of Glasgow in 2002. She's got an impressive list of awards over the years, among them, for instance, the Guardian Modern Painters Prize for Writing on Art in 2004. And it's evident from her CV that she has a wide range of interests, both in art and in the word. She was runner-up, for instance, for a poetry prize. In art, a wide range of media too: traditional sculpture in stone, sand sculpture, ice sculpture, painting, and so on. I think many people watching will be familiar with her sculpture Woman, Man, Sun, Moon, which is next to the M8. If you're driving from Glasgow to Edinburgh, it's on the right. And most recently, she's completed a statue of Thomas Donohoe in Busby, who introduced football to Brazil. Football has been a theme that's cropped up from time to time. One of the things that's immediately obvious, if you have a look at her website, is a rare level of social engagement and a lot of collaborative work. She's worked in many different places locally, within the UK and further afield, and most recently in Kharkiv, where she was an artist in residence, and that's of particular interest to us tonight. But before we move on to actually talking together with Kate, we've also got with us tonight Paul, who will be taking questions on social media. So if you'd like to ask Kate anything, please do send in your questions. Just post them under the broadcast on Facebook or on Twitter. And we also have Bernd, who's covering the technical aspects, which is just as well somebody is. So this evening, to start off, Kate, what brought you originally to Glasgow?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this event. It's very lovely to be here. And what brought me to Glasgow was my parents came here when I was a baby. My father came to teach at the teach theatre at the drama school, and my sister was born here in Scotland. First of all, we lived near Loch Lomond, and then came to live in Glasgow. So that's why.
Well, not quite by adoption in the way that I thought it must have been. Yeah. And of your various works and projects locally, I'm sure they're all memorable, but are there any which particularly stand out to you? I mean, the one on the M8 is the one that stands out to me because it visibly does.
I find this a really difficult question because I've most of the projects I've worked on, I've been very emotionally involved and attached to. Certainly, Woman, Man, Sun, Moon on the M8 it was a very important thing for me. I'd say that there's anything that's socially engaged work that's in the public realm, and I did quite a lot of work in Govan. I know we were talking earlier about Jimmy Reed is, for example, quoted in stones that are in Govan Cross,
yeah,
and along with lots of languages of people who've been there, going right back to kind of the Viking period, so the historic languages up to the present day, which are very kind of multicultural. So, but I love working in performance-based work as well. So I've done a little bit of work with theatre, which so I'm very open to work that's to do with bridging visual art and the word.
Yeah. Yeah. Many diverse talents. You've worked in a number of European countries. That must be very special. And incidentally, must be rather more difficult post-Brexit, I imagine. What guided you in that direction? Is this international element especially important to you?
I love working abroad. In fact, since post-Brexit, the two places I've been were to Ukraine, Ukraine and Austria, and then subsequently I spent a period of time in Berlin. Both were incredibly fruitful from an artistic point of view, or from many points of view. Being internationalism. what can I say? It's wonderful. So
it's obviously a deep part of you.
Very much so. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And working collaboratively too, working with others on a project. I think we often think of art in its broadest sense and writing as being quite a lonely individual activity, but clearly for you it's not always been like that. And is that just something that's happened, or has it been a conscious choice? Is it, is it something that you think is particularly important?
I think it's a mixture of the two, I'd say. I'm very happy working on my own, but I also very often love the collaborative process, and that can be in creating an object of art, or in terms of something sculptural, or something that's more performance based, or film even. So really, my driving force is the art itself, and so in a sense, really, how the art is achieved, whether that's something that I've got to do the spade work myself, or whether I'm working with other people. That's in a way that's part of the whole process. So both for me can be incredibly rewarding.
Literally spade work if you're working in sand.
Yes, absolutely. It can be very physical, but then all sculpture's physical. I was recently casting a piece just the other day, and it's I think I've been trying to work out how I'm going to lift the thing and maneuver it. So it's a very physical job, which I love.
Yes, I can imagine. Because what sort of material are you working in when you say casting a?
Well, the sculpture that I'm making at the moment, I'm planning to cast in cement fondue, which is a particular kind of sculptor cement, but it's basically just cement. But I'm going to be fitting, it's a figure, but with elements of literally kind of metal plumbing parts which are going to be fitted into it. So I'm quite excited about how that's going to work. And a little bit of gold in there as well. So so it's been really lovely working on that right now. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're particularly interested to hear about Kharkiv, because obviously that's so much in the news at the moment. And I can't say that until recently I knew very much, if anything, about Kharkiv. How did you come to be involved in that?
Well, it's basically fundamentally connected to a long-term project that I've been working on. I mean, ridiculously long, sort of 10-year project, which has involved a lot of writing. And as part of that, I had been looking into my own family roots, which is also connected to work that I'd done right at the beginning of my kind of practice as an artist. And in that research, I found, to my surprise, that I actually had going back several generations, I have roots in Ukraine. And I think I'd applied to something that was in Ukraine and kind of forgotten about it. And then out of the blue, I got this invitation to come and take part in a residency called Perceived Identities to Have or to Be at the Yermolov Center, which is in Kharkiv. So I went, and I was there for I think it was almost a month residency leading up to the exhibition. A very extraordinary experience, which changed a lot of things for me.
Yes, I can imagine, and must also very much change how you have understood the things that have been happening in the last few months. I imagine, you hadn't been to Ukraine before, had you?
No, I hadn't. No, I mean, I'd spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and I knew Hungary and the Baltic states, but no, never Ukraine. No,
never Ukraine.
No,
as as so many of us. And what were your first impressions then? I mean, not to do with art specifically, but just getting there.
Well, I flew to Kyiv, and I have to roll back a bit here because when I was still at art school, I went to we did a residency in as was then the USSR. And so I was in Moscow and Leningrad, and arriving in Kyiv, I realized that I was quite shocked to find that I'd arrived at in a country that I sensed was at war. And
even in 2017,
absolutely,
and I think that's what people here really were remarkably unaware of.
As was I, absolutely, as was I. But the feeling that I got in Kyiv when I arrived was reminded me to a certain degree of the feeling that I'd had it in Moscow in '86, of this very very dense, extraordinary atmosphere, and it was clearly a place at war, and I was shocked, and I thought I wonder how I'm going to be able to, this is going to be a very heavy experience, and I then took the train out to Kharkiv, not really knowing what to expect, and but knowing that Kharkiv was very close, even closer to the Russian border, and was amazed when I arrived there. Actually, that heavy atmosphere had lifted, and I arrived in this extraordinary city. I have to say, Kyiv is an extraordinary city also, but there's a lot going on.
Yes. I mean, I did know. Well, I have found out that Kharkiv is really quite a Russian city, as well as quite a Ukrainian city. Certainly in terms of language.
It's very mixed. It's mixed, complicated, rich, wonderful, and very. The whole of the eastern part of Ukraine has got such a very complex and deep history. And yes, there's Russian and Ukrainian and all of that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, of course, Kharkiv has been particularly hard hit during the last months, and indeed is, well, as we were saying earlier, the last few days have been, after a period of being a bit calmer, the last few days have been, there's been a lot of fighting. Have you had any recent contact with any of the people that you worked with there? I mean, it was a collaborative project you were doing there, wasn't it?
Well, I collaborated with. So to answer your question, yes, I have had.
Which question? Yes.
The first question of have I had contact with people over in Ukraine? Yes, I have. I've had a lot of contact, and I've over the last since I was over there. And I had gone over to work on my own work, but when I was there, I did collaborate with two artists when I was there, Bella Logachova and Alexander Prezhnyenko. And I was in touch with Bella this morning. Bella's still in Kharkiv, and it was fantastic to talk with her on Facebook this morning. So yes, I have been in touch a lot. Yeah.
Yes, that must have been very illuminating.
It's been extraordinary.
In touch with someone like that, yeah. And I mean, when you were there, were you working on a project that was linked with their political situation, or
Well,
was that kind of just in the background?
Well, I went over there. I had, as I say, I'd kind of gone over there because I had found out these my own roots were there in Ukraine, and so I took over in my rucksack a handful of Scottish earth.
Ah.
Because I had been, the other thing that I'd been thinking about was the whole thing about environment and what, but I suppose, you know, really fundamentally what Earth means to us. And what I wanted to do was to work with the Chernozem, which is the black earth of Ukraine. And so that's what I did. But because of this kind of overwhelming feeling I had of arriving in a place that was at war and kind of having my whole perspective altered, it ended up that an awful lot of what I did, although I made this kind of big sculptural painting using the Scottish earth and the Chernozem, mixing them together, but I did work that was very directly about the political situation in Ukraine and Crimea, the annexation of Crimea. And so I hadn't expected to be doing that kind of work, but it was so overwhelming, so powerful and strong. The experience of being there that I didn't feel I could do anything other than that. And also I collaborated on a short film with Bella and Alexander about the conflict. At that point, the conflict in the Donbass region, more properly called the Donbass War. Because Bella's parents were, the first time I heard about Mariupol was through Bella, because her parents were in Mariupol. I'm glad to say I asked after her parents today when I spoke with her this morning, and they are in Donetsk still. And Bella is, is very, very concerned for their safety, but and also it's much harder to be in touch because social media is being restricted over there. But anyway, going back to the question, we made a short film about her, very much about Bella's own personal experience about what the conflict meant. So yeah.
Well, I really wanted to hear some more about the relationship that you see between art and politics. You mentioned earlier when we were talking an article you'd read by Timothy Snyder, in which he talks about Putin's genocidal war being built by propagandists from pixels. Would you make Bernd's put up the what I wanted to refer to. I was wondering how much of a distinction you would make between art and, say, posters or political cartoons. And here's the visual, which certainly played a role here in the Brexit debate, both before and after the referendum. I mean, before there was the red bus, and then there was Farage's shameful photo of people, of a queue of immigrants, which in fact had nothing specifically to do with the EU referendum or the UK. It was taken on the Croatia-Slovenia border. And one of the things that I've been very interested in is the way in which the image of the ship of state has been used quite regularly to show us the often to contrast the weakness of EU, the weakness of the UK having cast itself off from the mothership of the EU. However, you have got some slides that you want to show us, and I'd really be interested to see them.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm just in answer to your question. Thinking about the idea of how art and politics. I mean, actually going back to Timothy Snyder, he's in on his recent book on tyranny. I was wondering whether, you know, in a sense, art is about, he talks about standing out or taking responsibility for the face of the world, in a sense, you know, the face of the world, you know, the symbols of what we're looking at. And in a sense, I think art can help to do that, and it kind of give a plurality of voices. But I wanted to just show some of the slides from or images that I had from Ukraine, and this one here, this is in Kyiv, in Independence Square, which I took, you know, when I was there in 2017, with this huge simple sign here, you know, freedom is our religion. But that was there, right, for everybody to see.
Broken chain.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And the site of this is overlooking where the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity, where this all took place.
In 2014.
Yeah. So in fact, if we could go on to the next slide, I can just show you this. This is a kind of very famous landmark, St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. But if you go to, and if you can see, there's a wall to the just here, exactly to the side of the cathedral. And this, if you could just see in the corner, I mean, this is just some of the people who have perished since 2014. A memorial wall to those people, and I you know, when I arrived in Kyiv, I just walked around the city, and I was shocked to see this, not knowing that the war had been going on. And if we can go on to the next slide, please. And you find everywhere in Kyiv. This is actually, sorry, in Ukraine. This in every little town. I travelled from Kyiv to Kharkiv, and then over to Lviv in the west. And in each town that you go to, you will find often in the city squares, and this is in the Freedom Square in Kharkiv, these sort of little. You see this kind of blue and white tent here, with an exhibition set up around it, and these were actually made by the army themselves. And it was a way of, because Ukraine is such a big country, and it's larger than France, a vast space, and so, you know, at that point, although the conflict was going on in the east, in Kharkiv, for example, you could ignore it up to a point. And so the army was there, you know, had set up these tents. I spoke to one of the person who was inside this particular tent, a soldier called Constantine, who, you know, said that, you know, we're raising awareness about what's going on. And you would, you know, in Kyiv, you would see these soldiers coming back from the front. So in a sense, this is the army itself showing, you know, making their own symbolic gestures to try to raise awareness.
And do you think that this sort of often poster art that you're showing, would you classify that as art, or is it would you make a distinction?
That's that's a hard question. I mean, the images that you can see here are photographic images from the front. So you know, these are, I don't know what you call them,
but they're positioned. I mean, perhaps that makes them cross over a bit into another domain.
I think so. I mean, it's perhaps beyond art. It's I found it very, very extraordinary to see these kind of you know, tent constructions. I mean, you can see, you know, you can have helicopters going overhead or whatever, but you know, they're these flimsy tents were put up.
Fragile, yes.
Yeah, and yet what they're actually talking about is something, in a sense, the most profound thing that we life, death, and war. It's pretty. You can't get deeper than that, really. So yeah. Anyway,
I interrupted your flow of photos.
Okay, so if we could move on to the next one, please. So the little that tent-like construction that you saw there was in the Freedom Square, which is next to Dershprom, which is this massive constructivist masterpiece that was made during the Soviet era. I think it was 1928, and at the time was one of the tallest skyscrapers in the world. I mean, taller than anything in America or whatever, I think. But this, and I went inside, although, I mean, it's got incredible details, like, for example, the railings are all made of copper, because it was thought that copper was something that had healing properties, as we know it does. So it's extraordinary details and an extraordinary building altogether. And this was one of the places that was bombed in the very first days of, back in February, first week, in February this year. Extraordinary. Anyway, so that was a terrible. A terrible event, or a kind of a measure of the barbarism of the attack. That there's no need to bomb this place. There's nothing about it that it's an entirely kind of civilian area where there's connected to the university. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. This is a sculpture, and again a Soviet sculpture, which I thought was quite a lovely sculpture in some respects of university students, in the process of running off to go and be part of some war somewhere. On the other side of it, one of the students is holding a gun. But this large, life-size sculpture was immediately outside the Yermolov Center. If we could go to the next slide, please. Which was a big space, a kind of almost like an underground space. This is me kind of working with this Chernozem, this earth on the painting inside the space. If we could go on to the next slide, please. And this is Bella Logachova, one of the artists with whom I collaborated, and the whole group of artists. I mean, I think it was about 15 or 20 of us altogether. We all went out into the countryside to this, just for a lovely day out at one point, where I was able to, we dug up some of this Chernozem, and several of us all lugged these kind of bag loads of earth back to the gallery. So this is a photograph of me and Bella at that point. But this is another, for me, an interesting issue or fact that Ukraine itself means border. It's the borderland. It's the edge, and so. And in fact, this place where we went to dig up the earth was near a river, which was itself happened to be called the border or the edge, although a different word. So I just think that is in terms of the symbolism of Ukraine and what it means and what it signifies in terms of its importance, I think is for me, I think is very significant. If we could go on to the next slide, please. This is an image of Bella and Sasha, her partner, with whom she often works. When we were filming this little short film that we made together about the conflict in Donbass, we found this a place right in the centre of Kharkiv, housing estate with a kind of circular place that used to be a fountain, and so this kind of this work was based on some graffiti that we found in the space, which had a poem by Mayakovsky. So it was you get some really good quality graffiti in Kharkiv. So we based our film around this Mayakovsky graffiti, and Bella, who's Sasha's filming here, she spoke about her experience of the conflict in Donbass and what that meant, and what it meant to wake up to hear the sound of helicopters overhead, and just the kind of the grind of that experience of how it affected her and her whole family.
I bet they'd like to go back to that grind now compared with what they are experiencing, however.
Absolutely. Well, just to say, though, that Bella's parents, in fact, are journalists, and they had chosen, and at this point they were in Mariupol, had chosen to stay in Mariupol, even though there were... even back then it was a hard place to be, because they felt it was important that there were journalistic witnesses to what was going on. And kind of going back to your earlier question about those images around the army construction, in a sense that's where free and independent journalism perhaps meets art. It's any image which is about truth, perhaps. Then if it's truthful, then then perhaps you can call it art. Anyway, next slide, please. Yeah, I thought you might be interested in this one from the EU perspective. This is an early work of Bella's that she had done back in around 2014, and it's from a series called Art Nouveau, and I think we're going to have some links to Bella's work that we're going to post later, I hope. But I thought this was really interesting, and this is outside the Faculty of Economics in Kharkiv. That's what the sign says in the corner there. And there were two sculptures on either side of the door, and she'd wrapped a Ukrainian flag around one and this EU flag around the other. So I just thought that was maybe an appropriate image to show here. And if we could go on to the next slide, please. This is another of Bella's images. Again, part of this Art Nouveau series. I should say that Bella is a lecturer at the Kharkiv Academy of Art, and she just told me this morning that she's about to have a major exhibition in Buffalo, New York. But she's chosen, her mission is to be in Kharkiv, and despite all the difficulties, she's working incredibly hard and working with her students at the university, and also posting pictures on an almost daily basis for the Art Nouveau series. And this one is going all the way back to 2014, and it's got a little, it's about the downing of the Malaysian airline Flight 17, which the parts of the wreckage of that plane are certainly back in 2017 were held in a warehouse in Kharkiv. So that was very present in the city itself. But she, as you can see from this image, she used, I think that kind of Timothy Snyder thing of pixelated propaganda and pixels. She's really using pixels here in this picture, but also combining that with kind of traditional Ukrainian imagery. If we could go on to the next slide, please. This is a very recent image of Bella's from the Art Nouveau series, and it's about the Donbass evacuation in this year. And I think what she does is extraordinary to bring a sense of humanity and humour even, and wit and compassion into these very, very grim stories that she's telling and getting out into the world. An extraordinary artist. And it was a great privilege and pleasure to be able to collaborate with her. And I hope I will be able to again in the future, and certainly to be able to be in contact with her and with Sasha. If we could go on to the next slide, please. This is another artist whose work I wanted to show you, Hannah Shumska, with whom I shared accommodation when I was staying there. And Hannah is a young Ukrainian artist who was directly involved in the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, and she was a very proudly part of that whole what went on at that point. And so for me, again, I learned so much from her about what that revolution meant for young people, and in Kyiv, in the Maidan, where the revolution took place, they have placards up saying that artists were very much part of the whole process of that revolution, and certainly Hannah is a perfect representative of that. And she is although from Kharkiv, she was Kharkiv and Lviv. She's now in Poland. And enrolled in the doctoral program there. This image is called The Garden of the Virtual Colonizers. It's a huge painting, and I have it here beside me because I have adopted this painting.
How wonderful.
It is wonderful. For me, this is a way of supporting Ukrainian artists. I have, and it's one of two large paintings which I have here. So this painting of Hannah's was made, as I say, in 2019, before obviously before this current the second invasion. But you have here, and she's again playing with images with propaganda, if you like, and then juxtaposing that with a more painterly approach. It's made of it's in oil with serigraphy, like screen printed images. I don't know if you can see that sort of at the back of the picture space, if you like. And if we could go on to the next slide, please. And this is a somewhat later work of hers, where again she's again using those the tropes of social media, like hashtags and the @sign and following, juxtaposing that with Cyrillic, Polish, English, and these kind of almost pixel-like images of this kind of strange landscape where you're not sure whether it's real or not real, and the borders are complicated, and again there's a kind of sense of depth and mystery going on, and yet she also manages to get a kind of feeling of wittiness and like a kind of visual puzzles going on.
Kate, I think I need to ask you to go a little bit more quickly.
Okay, I will whiz through the next ones. Next slide, please. Tatiana Kolevchik, another painting I have here. Tatiana is a slightly different artist who's playing with images of Ukrainian traditional images. If you could please go on to the next slide. And this is another of Tatiana's pictures. She often uses gold leaf and colour, but this kind of very feminist kind of image of a Ukrainian person with a flak jacket on. If we go to the next slide, next two slides quite quickly, these are the images that I made when I was in Ukraine. They call This Is the Land We Have on Our Inheritance. They're printed at Kharkiv Academy of Art, and I'm going to be selling them in aid of Ukraine. I have a limited number of them left, which I brought back with me in my rucksack. So this is kind of based on the image from Crimea within the context of the Black Sea. If we could go on, please, to the next slide. And they're made of this complementary pair of images that the title is from the T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday, which, yeah, sadly I think it seemed appropriate at the time.
All too appropriate.
All too appropriate, yeah, sadly still appropriate. If we could move on, please, to the next slide. This is the painting that I ended up making, which is called Swimming in the Black Sea, which is made of Ukrainian chernism and Scottish earth. And it's in memory of Hannah Shumska telling me about her grandmother's story of the Holodomor, the terrible famine that happened in Ukraine in the 1930s. Mm. If you go to the next slide, please. This is at the opening at the Ermolov Centre in 2017, where there are all of the kind of artists and their guests milling and talking. Last I saw of the Ermolov Centre, people were sleeping in there, kind of doing a 3-day vigil in connection with the war. Still managing to make art, but it was almost as though the Yermolov Centre itself had become almost like an underground bunker. If we could go please to the next slide. This was sent to me this morning by Bella. It's an image that she took of glass in a metro station where people, women and children, were hiding, sheltering. When you can see the bullet holes coming through the glass. So that was taken within the last day or so, I think. And that's the end of the slideshow.
Goodness, it's very moving to think of managing to find ways of expressing horror at what's going on in art, as it's actually going on like that. Now, you've mentioned that you're selling some prints to raise money for Ukraine. We're all very anxious to do anything we can to help, and I think it's the sense of how difficult it is that's really frustrating for people. And I think it's especially frustrating or especially painful when you think of the fact that really Kharkiv would have quite a lot in common with Glasgow. I mean, it's about the same size in terms of population anyway. It's got a reputation as an industrial city. And yet, from what you say and what I've read too, it's really got quite an edgy art scene going Absolutely. On. Is there anything that you can foresee in the future that we can do to help them?
Yes, I think there are, and I think that there's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm going to be selling some art exhibitions going on and various ways where you can buy things to help where the funds will be going to Ukraine. I think another way is buying or adopting Ukrainian artists' work. It can be, and I will post up some links for Ukrainian artists. And I know that I think that I certainly can recommend that as a very lovely thing to do. And I know that another idea that's been around, I've heard, is the possibility of, I thought was a wonderful idea of the possibility, as you say, of Glasgow and Kharkiv. There are many similarities in terms of the industrial background and the edgy art, all the rest of it. And this maybe a possibility of twinning, which I thought twinning the two cities, which I thought sounded like just a fantastic idea. And it would certainly make me feel much happier about living in Glasgow, knowing that it was, being in a city that would be there in a kind of place of solidarity for Kharkiv and helping to possibly to rebuild it and strengthen it again after the war. Just to have strengthen those ties would be fantastic. So I think twinning is a wonderful idea.
Yes, well, I mean, the city councils, I think shortly after they suspended the twinning with Russian Rostov-on-Don, brought up the idea in very general terms, and some of us have been talking about it and thinking it would be a really good idea. And you'd agree with us?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a fantastic idea. Absolutely fantastic idea. Brilliant.
Well, let's hope that that's something that we can take forward. Paul, we haven't really come over to you, but you haven't. Have you got any questions on social media? I haven't had any messages from you.
No, I haven't. Sorry.
I haven't. Well, I the trouble is that I've kind of interrupted and asked the questions that I thought people might have asked as we've been through. I think that our time is really more or less up, but we look forward very much to seeing the links to Ukrainian art that you're going to send us and that we'll put up on the Facebook page and probably on Twitter as soon as we can, and see what we can take forward more generally. It's been really interesting. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Bernd and Paul.